Hello everyone, and welcome. Today, we are jumping back in to the world of the Bridge of the Gods by F.H. Balch. The last time we were here, we completed the second book of the book. Where the Chief Multnomah officially announced the council and sent out the runners to announce the council to the other tribes of Oregon and nearby in Washington. And now in Book 3, we get to see the first results of that decision to hold the council. Book 3, The Gathering of the Tribes. Chapter 1, The Broken Peace Pipe. My full defiance, hate, and scorn. Scott. It is the day after the departure of the runners to call the Great Council, 8 years since Cecil Gray went out into the wilderness. Smoke is curling slowly upward from an Indian camp on the prairie not far from the Blue Mountains of eastern Oregon. 15 or 20 cone-shaped lodges, each made of mats stretched on a framework of poles, compose the village. It swarms with wolfish-looking dogs and dirty, unclad children. Heaps of refuse, heads and feet of game, lie decaying among the wigwams, tainting the air with their disgusting odor. Here and there, an ancient, withered specimen of humanity sits in the sun, absorbing its rays with a dull, animal-like sense of enjoyment, and a group of warriors lie idly talking. Some of the squaws are preparing food, boiling in it watertight willow baskets by filling them with water and putting in hot stones. See Bancroft's Native Races, Volume 1, page 270. Horses are tethered near the lodges, and others are running loose on the prairie. There are not many of them. The Indians have only scores now, where a century later Lewis and Clark found thousands. And there are old men in the camp who can recall the time when the first horses ever seen among them were bought or stolen from the tribes of the South. On every side, the prairie sweeps away in long grassy swells and hollows, rolling off to the base of the Blue Mountains. The camp has the sluggish aspect that an Indian camp always presents at noonday. Suddenly, a keen-sighted warrior points to a dim speck far over the prairie toward the land of the Bannocks. A white man would have scarcely noticed it, or, if he had, would have thought it only some wandering deer or antelope. But the Indians, glancing at the moving object, have already recognized it as a horseman coming straight toward the camp. Some messenger it is, doubtless, from the Bannocks. Once the whole camp would have rushed to arms at the approach of a rider from that direction, for the two tribes had been at bitter enmity. But of late, the peace pipe has been smoked between them, and the old feud is at an end. Still, the sight arouses the old feud Still, the sight arouses considerable curiosity and much speculation as to the object of the visitor. He is a good rider, his horse is fleet, and in less time than would have been thought possible, reaches the camp. He gallops up, stops near the lodges that are farthest out, and springs lightly to the ground. He does not go on into the camp, but stands beside his horse till advances are made on the other side. The dogs bark at him. His steed, a fiery black, tosses its head and paws the ground. He stands beside it immovably, and to all appearance is ready so to stand till sunset. Some of the warriors recognize him as one of the bravest of the Bannocks. He looks like a daring, resolute man, yet wary and self-contained. After a while, one of the Cayuse warriors, for this was a camp of the Cayuses, advanced toward him, and a grave salutation was exchanged. Then the Bannock said that he wanted to see the Cayuse chief, Snoqualmie, in the council lodge, for the chief of the Bannocks had sent a talk to the Cayuses. The warrior left him to speak with Snoqualmie. In a short time he returned, saying that the chief and the warriors had gone to the council lodge and were ready to hear the talk that their brother, the chief of the Bannocks, had sent them. The messengers tied his horse by its lariat, or long hair rope, to a bush and followed the brave to the lodge. It was a large wigwam in the center of the village. A crowd of old men, women, and children had already gathered around the door. Within, on one side of the door, sat in 3 rows a semicircle of braves, facing the chief, who sat on the opposite side. Near the door was a clear space where the messenger was to stand while speaking. He entered, and the doorway behind him was immediately blocked up by the motley crowd, excluded from the interior. Not a warrior in the council looked at him. Even the chief, Snoqualmie, did not turn his head. The messenger advances a few paces into the room, stopped, and stood as impassive as the rest. Then, when the demands of Indian stoicism had been satisfied, Snoqualmie turned his face, a handsome but treacherous and cruel face, upon the messenger. The warrior comes to speak the words of our brother, the chief of the Bannocks. He is welcome. Shall we smoke the pipe of peace before we hear our brother's words? The Bannock gazed steadily at Snoqualmie. In that fierce and proud regard was something the Cayuse could not fathom. Why should the peace pipe be smoked? He asked. Was it not smoked in the great council a moon ago? Did not Snoqualmie say then that the 2 tribes should henceforth be as one tribe, and that the Bannocks should be the brethren of the Cayuses forever? Those were the words, replied the chief with dignity. Snoqualmie has not forgotten them. All eyes were now turned to the messenger. They saw that something unexpected was coming. The Bannock drew his form up to its full height, and his resolute features expressed the bitterest scorn. Nor have the Bannocks forgotten. At the council you talked peace, peace. Last night some of your young men surprised a little camp of Bannocks, a few old men and boys who were watching horses, and slew them and ran off the horses. "Is that your peace? The Bannocks will have no such peace. This is the word the chief of the Bannocks sends you." Holding up the peace pipe that had been smoked at the great council and afterward given to the medicine men of the Bannocks as a pledge of Cayuse sincerity, he broke the long slender stem twice, thrice, crushed the bowl in his fingers, and dashed the pieces at Snoqualmie's feet. It was a defiance, a contemptuous rejection of peace, a declaration of war more disdainful than any words could have made it. Then, before they could recover from their astonishment, the Bannock turned and leaped through the crowd at the door. For an instant's stay was death. Even as he leaped, Snoqualmie's tomahawk whizzed after him, and a dozen warriors were on their feet, weapon in hand. But the swift, wild drama had been played like lightning, and he was gone. Only a brave who had tried to intercept his passage lay on the ground outside the lodge, stabbed to the heart. They rushed to the door in time to see him throw himself on his horse and dash off, looking back to give a yell of triumph and defiance. In less time than it takes to describe it, the horses tethered near the lodges were mounted and 20 riders were in pursuit. But the Bannock was considerably in advance now, and the fine black horse he rode held its own nobly. Out over the prairie flew the pursuing cayuses, yelling like demons, the fugitive turning now and then to utter a shout of derision. Back at the lodges, the crowd of spectators looked on with excited comments. "His horse is tired. Ours are fresh. They gain on him. No, he is getting farther from them. See, he throws away his blanket. They are closer, closer. No, his horse goes like a deer." Out over the prairies, fleeting like the shadow of a hurrying cloud, passed the race. The black horse leading, the Cayuse riders close behind, their long hair outstreaming, their moccasins pressed against their horses' sides, their whips falling without mercy. Down a canyon they swept in full pursuit and passed from the ken of the watchers at the camp, the black horse still in the van. But it could not cope with the fresh horses of the Cayuses, and they gained steadily. At last the pursuers came within bowshot, but they did not shoot. The fugitive knew too well the reason why. Woe unto him if he fell alive into their hands. He leaned low along his horse's neck, chanting a weird refrain as if charming it to its utmost speed, and ever and anon looked back with that heart-shaking shout of defiance. But steadily his pursuers gained on him, and one, outstripping the rest, rode alongside and reached out to seize his rein. Even as he touched it, the Bannock's war club swung in air, and the Cayuse reeled dead from his saddle. A howl of rage burst from the others, a whoop of exultation from the fugitive. But at length his horse's breath grew short and broken. He felt its body tremble as it ran, and his enemies closed in around him. Thrice the war club rose and fell. Thrice was the saddle emptied, but all in vain. Quickly his horse was caught. He was dragged from the saddle and bound hand and foot. He was thrown across a horse and brought back to the village. What a chorus of triumph went up from the camp, and when it was seen that they were bringing him back, It was an ominous sound, with something of wolfish ferocity in it, but the bannock only smiled grimly. He is bound to a post, a charred, blood-stained post, to which others of his race have been bound before him. The women and children taunt him, jeer at him, strike him even. The warriors do not. They will presently do more than that. Some busy themselves building a fire nearby. Others bring pieces of flint, spear points, jagged fragments of rock, and heat them in it. The prisoner, dusty, torn, parched with thirst, and bleeding from many wounds, looks on with perfect indifference. Snoqualmie comes and gazes at him. The prisoner does not notice him, is seemingly unconscious of his presence. By and by, a band of hunters ride up from a long excursion. They have heard nothing of the trouble. With them is a young bannock who is visiting the tribe. He rides up with his Cayuse comrades, laughing, gesticulating in a lively way. The jest dies on his lips when he recognizes the bannock who is tied to the stake. Before he can even think of flight, he is dragged from his horse and bound. His whilom comrades, as soon as they understand the situation, become his bitterest assailants. For it is war again, war to the death between the tribes, until 2 centuries later, both shall alike be crushed by the white man. At length the preparations are complete, and the women and children, who have been swarming around and taunting the captives, are brushed aside like so many flies by the stern warriors. First, the young bannock who has just come in is put where he must have a full view of the other. Neither speaks, but at a glance passes between them. That is like a mutual charge to die bravely. Snoqualmie comes and stands close by the prisoner and gives directions for the torture to begin. The bannock is stripped. The stone blades that have been in the fire are brought, all red and glowing with heat, and pressed against his bare flesh. It burns and hisses under the fiery torture, but the warrior only sneers. It doesn't hurt. You can't hurt me. You are fools. You don't know how to torture. See Ross Cox's Adventures on the Columbia River for a description of torture among the Columbia tribes. No refinement of cruelty could wring a complaint from him. It was in vain that they burned him, cut the flesh from his fingers, branded his cheek with the heated bowl of the pipe he had broken. Try it again, he said mockingly, while his flesh smoked. I feel no pain. We torture your people a great deal better, for we make them cry out like little children. More and more murderous and terrible grew the wrath of his tormentors, as this stream of vituperation fell on their ears. Again and again, weapons were lifted to slay him, but Snoqualmie put them back. He can suffer more yet, he said. And in the words were like a glimpse into the cold, merciless heart of the man. Other and fiercer tortures were devised by the chief, who stood over him, pointing out where and how the keenest pain would be given, the bitterest pang inflicted on that burned and broken body. At last it seemed no longer a man, but a bleeding, scorched, mutilated mass of flesh that hung to the stake. Only the lips still breathed defiance, and the eyes gleamed deathless hate. Looking upon one and another, he boasted of how he had slain their friends and relatives. Many of his boasts were undoubtedly false, but they were still very bitter. It was by my arrow that you lost your eye, he said to one. I scalped your father, to another. And every taunt provoked counter-taunts, accompanied with blows. At length, he looked at Snoqualmie, a look so ghastly, so disfigured, that it was like something seen in a horrible dream. I took your sister prisoner last winter. You never knew. You thought she had wandered from home and was lost in a storm. We put out her eyes, we tore out her tongue, and then we told her to go out in the snow and find food. You should have seen her tears as she went out into the storm, and the sentence was never finished. While the last word lingered on his lips, his body sunk into a lifeless heap under a terrific blow, and Snoqualmie put back his blood-stained tomahawk into his belt. Shall we kill the other? Demanded the warriors, gathering around the surviving Bannock, who had been a stoical spectator of his companion's suffering. A ferocious clamor from the women and children hailed the suggestion of the new torture. They thronged around the captive. The children struck him, the women abused him, spat upon him even. But not a muscle of his face quivered. He merely looked at them with stolid indifference. Kill him, stretch him on red-hot stones. We will make him cry. Snoqualmie hesitated. He wished to save this man for another purpose, and yet the Indian bloodthirst was on him. Chief and warrior alike were drunken with fury, mad with the lust of cruelty. As he hesitated, a white man, clad in the garb of an Indian hunter, pushed his way through the crowd. Silence fell upon the throng. The clamor of the women, the fierce questioning of the warriors ceased. The personality of this man was so full of tenderness and sympathy, so strong and commanding, that it impressed the most savage nature. Amid the silence, he came and looked first at the dead body that yet hung motionless from the stake, then sorrowfully, reproachfully, at the circle of friends around. An expression half of sullen shame, half of defiance, crossed more than one countenance as his glance fell upon it. Friends, said he, sadly, pointing at the dead, is this your peace with the Bannocks? The peace you prayed the Great Spirit to bless? The peace that was to last forever? The Bannocks sent back the peace pipe by this man, and he broke it and cast the pieces in our teeth, answered one stubbornly. And you slew him for it? Why not have sent runners to his tribe, asking why it was returned, and demanding to know what wrong you had done, that you might right it? Now there will be war. When you lie down to sleep at night, the surprise may be on you, and massacre come, while your eyes are heavy with slumber. When you are gone on the buffalo trail, the tomahawk may fall on the women and children at home. Death will lurk for you in every thicket, and creep round every encampment. The Great Spirit is angry, because you have stained your hands in blood without cause. There was no reply. This white man, coming from far eastern lands, lying they knew not where, who told them God had sent him to warn them to be better, had a singular influence over them. There was none of his hearers who did not dimly feel that he had done wrong in burning and scarring the poor mass of humanity before him. and that the Great Spirit was angry with him for it. Back in the crowd, some of the children, young demons hungering for blood, began to clamor again for the death of the surviving Bannock. Cecil Gray looked at him pityingly. "At least you can let him go." There was no answer. Better impulses, better desires, were struggling in their degraded minds. But cruelty was deeply rooted within them. The vague shame and misgiving his words had roused was not so strong as the dark animalism of their natures. Cecil turned to Snoqualmie. "I saved your life once. Will you not give me his?" The chief regarded him coldly. "Take it," he said after a pause. Cecil stooped over and untied the thongs that bound the captive, who rose to his feet amid a low, angry murmur from those around. Snoqualmie silenced it with an imperious gesture. Then he turned to the young Bannock. "Dog, one of a race of dogs, go back to your people and tell them what you have seen today. Tell them how we burned and tortured their messenger, and that we will let you go only to tell the tale. Tell them, too, that Snoqualmie knows his sister died by their hand last winter, and that for every hair upon her head, he will burn a Bannock warrior at the stake. Go, and be quick, lest my war party overtake you on the trail." The Bannock left without a word, taking the trail across the prairie toward the land of his tribe. The gift was given, but there was that given with it that made it bitter. "And now may I bury this dead body?" "It is only a Bannock. Who cares what is done with it?" replied Snoqualmie. "But remember, my debt is paid. Ask of me no more gifts." And the chief turned abruptly away. "Who will help me bury this man?" asked Cecil. No one replied, and he went alone and cut thongs that bound the body to the stake. But as he stooped to raise it, a tall, fine-looking man, a renegade from the Shoshones, who had taken no part in the torture, came forward to help him. Together they bore the corpse away from the camp to the hillside. Together they hollowed out a shallow grave and stretched the body in it, covering it with earth and heaping stones on top, that the coyote may not disturb the last sleep of the dead. When they returned to the camp, they found a war party already in the saddle, with Snoqualmie at their head, ready to take the Bannock trail. But before they left the camp, a runner entered it, with a summons from Multnomah, calling them to the great council of the tribes on Wapato Island, for which they must start on the morrow. And with that cliffhanger, we end this chapter, this most violent chapter of The Bridge of the Gods. I hope you have made it through the content warning that I will put at the beginning of this video, or perhaps in the description. This is definitely something that more sensitive listeners should not be watching or listening to. But with that, we begin to see Cecil's involvement in the council, as well as that of the Cayuses. Thank you everyone for watching. Hopefully, this has not turned you off from returning. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you.